So I was at Sundance Film Festival, and I still hadn't talked about a couple movies because they weren't getting a wide release for a while anyway, but I might as well talk about them now. One of the films I saw was The Night House by David Bruckner. Now, I've been keeping up with David Bruckner for a while and have really enjoyed seeing him grow as a filmmaker. His first projects were essentially segments in anthology horror films. He directed the best segment from The Signal 2007. He directed Amateur Night in the first VHS movie, which I think is the best of the entire series. He directed one of the best segments in Southbound. And his first full-length feature was The Ritual for Netflix, a film that I had many issues with but still really enjoyed. At the bare minimum, I know that walking into one of his projects, I'd at least see some creative and interesting filmmaking, and this one is no exception. Now, I should probably mention that this is kind of a ghost movie, and honestly, I'm not a huge fan of the genre. There are so many cheap and lazy ghost movies out there, and it doesn't really seem like the bar is all that high. However, I'd consider this film to be a cut above in the genre. Many films in the genre rely solely on manipulative techniques like jump scares, and although there are plenty of loud jump scares in this film, the experience of the film is not reliant on them at all. What really helps the experience of this film is that it has a great main character. She's interesting and likable. It seems like a really basic thing, but it's amazing how many movies just don't have that covered. Not only was she relatable and fun to watch, but Rebecca Hall's performance was pretty great. She was the best actor in the movie, so I'm glad that the film was spent with her. Now, despite this movie being fairly depressing and bleak in concept, it was actually surprisingly funny with some really great dialogue moments. There were points where it had a really good sense of humor. Now, not everything in this movie is great, and there are some parts that I feel could have been more polished. There were some moments in conversations that felt a little fake, and I couldn't even pinpoint whether or not it was the fault of the writing, directing, or acting. There are also a couple moments in the film that seem a little unintentionally goofy. One of the characters felt largely unnecessary, which was made worse so by how tropey they were. And as I mentioned, there are quite a few very loud jump scares, and I guess that just comes down to personal preference as to whether or not that will negatively impact your experience of the film. Personally, I was not bothered by them, and the biggest reason is because they didn't feel insanely unjustified. Like I said, the film has a lot more going for it, so it never feels as though they're being used as a crutch, and given the context of how they're used, it didn't really feel as though they were cheap. This film has an interesting presentation in terms of how the scenes are structured, and I enjoyed that the film left a lot of room for interpretation as well. The soundtrack to the film was well done, although I feel it could have been scaled back a tiny bit more. Overall, I was really engaged in the story and interested in seeing where it went. It did start to feel a little slow and repetitive near the middle of the film, but not so much that it ruined the experience. This movie is not perfect, but it is very solid and very competent. There were fun and interesting creative choices when it came to some of the scares in this film, and that really helped make this an enjoyable experience overall. Anyway, check this one out whenever it gets a wide release. I have no idea, but probably later this year. And while you're at it, check out some of David Bruckner's other films. And I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10. And the other film I saw at Sundance that I haven't talked about yet is Minari. This is a Korean-American drama starring Steven Yeun. Many of you might remember him from The Walking Dead. My favorite performance from him would have to be in Burning, which was a great movie. This is overall a very well-presented film. All of the acting was great, and the child performances weren't distracting. It's very professionally shot, and I really enjoyed the music. It's quite apparent that this story is one that is very personal to the director. Basically, it's about a Korean family trying to start a farm in 1980s Arkansas. This is a very heavily dramatic movie, although it's certainly not without its humor, and even the humor is not so much funny as it is endearing. The characters in this movie are all very likable, and you can tell that the film cares about them. Throughout the film, you just want things to work out and for them to be happy, although obviously it wouldn't be much of a drama if there was never any conflict. And the conflict was certainly engaging for the most part, although there were a couple moments where things felt a little bit heavy-handed. This film is not without subtlety, but there are definitely ideas that I wish were communicated in a less obvious way. For the majority of the film, it's easy to understand and empathize with these characters and their struggles, although unfortunately there was one scene near the end where one of the characters' motivations just seemed poorly communicated. Most of the movie was really great, but one of the dramatic moments seemed kind of forced. Still, like I said, the presentation of this film is great overall. This is a movie that will likely appeal to a variety of people, and I'm glad to have watched something that is so clearly a personal expression from the director. Anyway, check this one out if you want. I really enjoyed it, although not so much that it would make my end of the year list, I don't think. And I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10.